Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vice President Jennifer Fielder of the Montana Public Service Commission, and I am calling this meeting to order. This is an informational meeting on the Northwestern Energy report on the Missoula area extreme weather event and outages. The date is October 8th, 2024. The time is 1:31 p.m. And with me in the commission hearing room, the Bollinger Room, is Commissioner Annie Bukacek, District 5. And this meeting will be conducted informally, so we can have a conversation. No commission action will be taken today. And we've scheduled this to go from 1:30 to 3. So we've got a 90-minute block that we can use if needed. And with that, I would like to have Northwestern Energy representatives go ahead and introduce yourselves, and then we'll turn.
Good afternoon. Vice President Fielder.
Oh, thank you. We do have some attendance online. I do see that we have the other 3 commissioners. I'm sorry, commissioners. I wasn't looking at the monitor. So we have President Brown, we have Commissioner Randall Pinocci, and we also have Commissioner Tony O'Donnell joining us online. President Brown, was there anything else? He's still muted. There he goes.
Yes, no, just wanted to note the attendance of the rest of us.
Thank you very much, President Brown. My apologies for missing that. Okay, Northwestern Energy.
Thank you, commissioners, for having us here today. Actually kind of excited. I have 2 of my colleagues from the distribution operations department, and they informed me as we were walking into the room that they haven't had this privilege of meeting before the commission. So I'm excited for them for this opportunity. We, as Madam Chair, you described, we're here to talk about the Missoula event, weather event, and an extreme event it was. And we will go through our recovery to that event. I also want to note that, as you described, stop us, please, at any time. And I would prefer this to be the discussion that you described. Thank you for that, Madam Chair. We've put together a presentation, but more than anything, that's just to help us maneuver through the conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into this if that's good with you.
If you would
Madam
just
Chair.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm Jason Merkel. I'm the Vice President of Distribution Operations, and I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Dange. I'm the Director of Operations.
Yeah, you'll need to pull the microphone and you can bend it down and get it as close to your mouth as you can so that those online can hear you. Thank you.
My name is Nicole Dange. I'm the Director of Operations for Montana.
Good afternoon. My name is Kane Claunch. I am the Director of Central Construction. I guess that title and position spans for all 3 of our states.
Thank you. Mr. Merkel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you want to show the slide deck on Zoom? If you could share your screen, that way you can follow along. For those in the room can see where we're at, and I believe the commissioners that are on Zoom can also track with where we're at through the presentation. So again, July 24th of this year, we had a significant event, weather event hit the Missoula region, specifically the city of Missoula. What was unique about that event, as I'm sure you're aware, we continually monitor the weather for the impact of outages, wildfire, other operational interests. And what was unique about this event is it really wasn't forecasted. And when I say it wasn't forecasted, we knew there was some wind coming in. It was supposed to come in that evening. And actually the next day was supposed to be more significant winds. Even the weather services, I'll say they were telling us we were going to have a wind event within a minute or two after the event was already hitting. So it was unique from that perspective as well. So quite a surprise, and certainly the devastation was quite a surprise as well. On the next slide, what I'd really like to cover before we get into the details about Missoula is actually Northwestern Energy's restoration strategy. This slide represents a strategy that we apply to any storm, whether it be a cold weather event, ice storm, some of the snow events that we had even earlier in the year. You'll remember we had an event, icing and snow, that hit the Great Falls into Monarch area. Any event that we have from an electric perspective, this is our recovery strategy. When the event occurs, the first thing that we do is we stand up an incident command. That incident command doesn't necessarily follow the normal command hierarchy of the company. We work really hard to use the leadership and those that know the most and are closest to the event in establishing the command. The next.
Excuse me, Jason, did you say that is after an event?
Immediately following an event. Now, when we can predict an event or we see that likely we could have significant damage, we'll actually begin establishing or organizing for that command prior to the event even occurring. But certainly it is formalized post-event. There are times where we prepare and the storm moves through and the damage for us is less significant than we intended, and command is not necessary. We can handle it under our normal operation processes and normal command hierarchy. As soon as the command is established, or at least the beginning of a command, the command can change. The next phase we'll move into is what we call mobilization, and that's the work it takes to get crews, resources, and the appropriate equipment to an event. We also enter into shortly thereafter, and even during the mobilization phase, the assessment phase, which sometimes can be some of the most challenging component, is really getting your arms around what do you have and how extensive is the damage. The assessment phase sets us up to begin recovery, to begin making repairs, and then ultimately we'll at the end of the recovery, we'll begin to demobilize. Ultimately, we'll dissolve the command, and then it's typical that events such as the one in Missoula, that even though everybody's back in power and we've sent crews home, there's some low priority work and residual damages to the system that we will work on well into the future as a result of said event. What you see in blue on this slide our strategy focus areas. And this is, it's certainly not exact. Again, it's typical. So any one of these focus areas could move in duration of time. Seldom do they move one prioritized over the other, but certainly they move relative to time. Upon an event, the very first thing that we're focused on at Northwestern Energy is anything that could be a threat to public safety. And that could be a blown gas situation, lines down, energized and arcing, any reports of that, those types of situations. Those are what we're going to focus on first. We will then begin to focus on transmission. It doesn't help us or our customers to restore or repair anything too far down the line when we don't have transmission service. So we prioritize first on transmission, and you'll see parenthetically I put necessary transmission. That is, much of our transmission's looped. And if there's a transmission segment that is out of power, but it's not immediately needed to restore power to customers, we will move past that particular transmission segment and it will lay there until the end, if you will. We then move to substations. And then the next thing we really begin to focus on is critical community infrastructure. And what I mean by that is those are the things that are within the community that the community needs for recovery. And that we could be helping ourselves when we do this as well. We do look at, do we have power at our service center where much of our data is coming to us and allows us the ability to manage recovery. That could be an example. But certainly hospitals, police departments, uniquely, I'll bring you to the Monarch storm, the storm that hit Great Falls and devastated Monarch and the Nyhart area earlier this spring. One of the critical community infrastructures that we identified was the local cafe. It was the gathering place for the community. It provided them and those responding to with snowplows and whatnot for fuel, for food, for the things that they needed to also help the community. So the example of what critical community infrastructure can run a wide path, and it can change by community and by event. The next thing we focus on is our highest density customers. That is, how many customers can we restore for the least amount of repair? And the more significant repairs, although we might begin working on them, we know they're going to be lengthy. We know they're going to be timely. They might get pushed back a ways so that we can work on total recovery. Probably the last area from a customer perspective, once we're beyond the high density customers, are those single customers. And the single customers are challenging just simply because each individual situation is a different need, a different situation, and may require different crew resources. It's probably the most extensive portion of the recovery. It takes the longest time to get to total recovery. And you'll see when we go through the numbers of Missoula, where we graphically represent the recovery of customers, and you can almost see when we shift to low density because the recovery rate really begins to flatten. And then last but not least, we do have the non-outage repairs that we will then focus on. Things that are damages to our system that need to be repaired, but there is no associated outage. And we'll actually begin those type repairs when we have crews available. The transmission non-necessary would be an example of that. In the Missoula storm, we actually left a segment of line. It was laying on the road. We closed off the road and we left it to the very end. Not that it's not important to our system, but it was not absolutely needed to restore customers. So it was one of the last line segments that we got to. And again, those type of repairs can linger for months and months beyond the last customer being restored. So I'm going to stop there. I gave a lot of information, but I think this will be helpful for the whole conversation because it gives a little bit of a cadence, if you will, of how we approach this and where we would be at through various portions of the storm. Any questions, Chairman, at this point?
Thank you. This is a great slide, and I think this is a great time to open it up for questions that any commissioners may have about the kind of the system, the protocol that's used. Are there any questions from commissioners?
I have a question that precedes that.
Commissioner Bukacek?
Yes, thank you. Before we go on to the next slide, I have a question about something that preceded July 24th. You talked about it a little bit, the forecasters. So you knew something was going to be happening. And then July 22nd, so 2 days before the storm, you sent out messages to your folks, to your customers about possible public safety power shutoffs. So that was on the 22nd based on forecast, like something was brewing. And then on the 24th, right before the storm hit, there was a message, there was an announcement on your website that the PSPS is not imminent at this time. So it was the initial concern was based on forecasters, then the forecasters changed their minds about the risk. And so I was wondering if you could talk about that just a little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. It was a busy week. We started out with that week as commissioners. You know, I was here earlier in the year to talk about our wildfire mitigation and that we would be, we now evaluate PSPS as an option as a defense for wildfire mitigation. We've been lucky this year, especially by comparison with our neighboring states, that we haven't had the right mix of environmental conditions, temperatures and high winds that would substantiate a PSPS. That particular week was our first almost, if you will. We did some things in terms of communications that we learned from. We probably communicated to the public a bit earlier than what we should have because we were evaluating it, but we didn't really prepare the customers for what that means to be evaluating it. In hindsight, we still would have monitored, we would have evaluated, but we probably would have waited at least 6 to 8 hours if we were going to initiate a PSPS, if we had made the decision we were going to. Instead, we communicated that we were evaluating it, and ultimately it determined that although the wind event was significant enough to be evaluating a PSPS, the environmental conditions surrounding those winds were not of such that it warranted PSPS. And with the immense amount of damage that we had in Missoula, and the number of down power lines and the potential for a power line ignited fire did not occur, that would support that the decision we made was supported, and that we didn't need to go into a PSPS. It did create confusion earlier in the week, early on. With every cloud, there's a silver lining. And I think the silver lining to that was it really generated a conversation and promoted a conversation with customers. And it did so without an outage related to wildfire mitigation.
It certainly did create conversation.
Yeah. And, I think, yeah, like many things, I think early on, the negative comments came out. And this was obviously from my personal perspective, but as we worked our way through the week and the conversation became more and more understood, I think the reasonableness of what the company is doing with PSPS as a tool, I think ultimately began to prevail. And certainly I look to our neighbors in Idaho and other utilities that we've spoke with, and they had their hands full this last summer, and they implemented that particular strategy in a number of places, and I'm sure their customers understand why that is today.
So commissioners, we are seeing the slides on our screen just like you are, so I can't see if any hands are up. So if any commissioners have any questions, go ahead and speak up at this point. And I'd like to try to keep it to the slide so we can allow Northwestern to move through. They have quite a deck here to move through. So are there any questions about this protocol?
No questions, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Pinocci?
No questions. I certainly will have some later, though.
Okay, thank you.
No questions.
Okay, thank you. A couple on this protocol, and this slide is really informative about your organizational protocol. First of all, you mentioned that you, ahead of an event, you see something may be coming that requires attention, and so you get a incident command somewhat organized or ready on standby, perhaps, something like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, we begin identifying who would be who in the various boxes, and we'll get to a incident command slide in to make sure that we're going to have coverage and we'll be able to respond. We also talk about where our crews and do some beginning planning from a mobilization standpoint as well.
That goes to my question, is seeing that on this slide, there's an event and then there's mobilization. Do you ever do any preemptive mobilization to get things in order, get things deployed actually where you think you might need them? Is that something that you consider or ever do?
Yeah, the way we have our crews spread amongst the service territory, they're in fairly close proximity. One of the things that you really have to manage is that you don't mobilize too quickly. I'll point to Texas. They had a storm there that devastated them, and they brought crews in, and they weren't quite ready for those crews. In other words, they hadn't had the assessment, so they hadn't had the work organized yet. It can be quite a logistical burden to have them there too soon. So there is a bit of a sweet spot of matching when you're ready for them and when you can manage them as a receiving group. But I will say that we have had events specifically on the gas side where we've sent crews, had them ready. This particular event was forecast would have indicated that we may have had a gas shortage in the Kalispell area last winter, for example. And in that situation, we sent crews there and had them staged in the event that we were going to need them.
Glad to hear that.
Yep. Thank you.
I have a question about your hierarchy. I take this to mean that the lowest here in the blue letters is actually your highest priority, the imminent threat to public safety, and then transmission, necessary transmission, and then on through that sequence, with the lowest priorities actually being at the top of the chart here, correct? Non-outage repairs are your lowest priorities, imminent threat to public safety are your highest priorities. So when you get to the substation portion, from that point on, I assume that means distribution lines after that point?
That's correct.
And so when you get to critical community infrastructure, can you just tell us a little bit about your decision-making process and how that is prioritized? What, like the cafe, for example, or a hospital or a gas station or a grocery store or whatever it may be. How does that work? Who prioritizes that?
Well, often it's with input from the community officials, and them describing through a liaison to us what they view their needs are.
So you're speaking with local government then?
Yes. Yep. Local government, other agencies, Red Cross, those type of agencies have input into how we would prioritize that. Now, sometimes the damage doesn't allow us to prioritize it, which also helps, because if they're waiting there expecting to be back in power, and we know that the damage is so severe that it's not likely that that's going to happen, we can start thinking of other alternatives. Either they move a shelter, for example, or an example that we dealt with in the Monarch Nyhard. Sorry, it's fresh in my mind, so I use that as an example. What we did there was we knew we wouldn't have substations, and we knew that the town of Nyhard was in pretty good shape. It hadn't received a lot of distribution damage. So in that case, we elected to bring in a generator and put the whole community on generator. Those are the type of decisions that we make at that juncture.
And is that something that you coordinate with and plan for ahead of time through emergency services or emergency response coordination with like the emergency response coordinators at the county levels and state level? Are those kind of conversations and planning going on well ahead of, and outside of events, so that you know who you're supposed to contact and it's somewhat organized when something does hit?
Yeah, we certainly have established those relationships, and we have those contacts in terms of coordinating what we're going to do for a specific event. I can tell you the disaster and emergency services, they tabletop certain items or certain event types. Like, for example, here in Helen, I remember as I was a manager of this area, I was involved in planning around earthquakes and how we may handle that, and how we would identify what we would do for given scenarios. So that does occur within the community where we partner with those. Northwestern certainly doesn't lead that at a community level, but we're certainly at the table whenever we can be. We also have a position, our community relations managers, one in each of the effective divisions, along with our operation management. That's one of their requirements, is to build and establish and maintain those relationships for times like these.
So I've seen some forums and conferences happen in my community where different people involved in emergency response get together and they go through different case scenarios and what they would do, a train derailment, for example, or wildfire, whatever the top threats might be to that community. So Northwestern participates in those kinds of events and conversations with local communities?
We do.
Okay. And then just to pinpoint my question is who prioritizes that critical infrastructure? Who's the decision maker? Is it the incident commander or is there somebody else?
I would say it's at the incident command level, and a discussion is in to whoever the incident commander is reporting to. If it's something that is deemed so critical, we may adjust our priorities. We may adjust our resources to that. But certainly it's a conversation that starts there.
And are public service commissioners or the management of the commission consulted on any of this ever?
In terms of the recovery,
Real time, when you're having those conversations with local government officials, are you looping in your public service commissioners in any way?
probably not to the extent that you would want us to. At the time, we are dealing with, and I would say even in the leadership of the highest leadership of the company is usually brought in to those conversations when the conversation doesn't perhaps lead to the best outcome. If it's working itself out, the actual premise of incident command is it gets those decisions as close to the event as you possibly can get them, and within that community and within our incident command to work to the best possible solution. Certainly, like my involvement, I'm involved at a vice president level when there appears to be conflict in those decisions.
Okay, I know you have a lot of slides to get through, so are you ready to move on?
Oh, we are, and we will move through them quickly to stay on track.
Get going then.
So I'm going to turn this over to our director of operations. Largely, it's her teams that are comprised of the incident command and are in the field performing the repairs and working towards an effective recovery.
Okay, and can you remind me of your last name? I heard it, but I'm not sure I heard it correctly.
Sure, it's Nicole Benge,
Binge. Okay.
Benge.
Okay, and President Brown, you would be pleased to see the laptop computer Miss Bench has opened. It's full of MSU cats stickers. So, you might not like that too much. He's UM.
Oh, well, sorry.
Anyway.
My son gave them to me for Christmas.
Oh, good for your son.
Okay.
All right, Miss Bench.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to kind of just get into talking about the specific event we had in Missoula. So this was on July 24th, which was a Wednesday, just before 9 p.m. Significant windstorm. We've heard, reported winds 80 to 100 miles per hour. Lots of damage throughout the city. Lots and lots of trees in Missoula. It's a beautiful city with the trees, but a lot of broken trees, limbs, uprooted trees, and damage to our infrastructure. We ended up with, at fairly early on in that event, 44,000 customers without power in sort of the greater Missoula area. Missoula, small towns west a little bit, and then down the Bid Road a little bit. And just for perspective, we have about just over 80,000 total customers in the Missoula division. So it was over half of our customers in that division and about 10% of all of our Montana customers. This map just shows that outage area, that impacted area. And just talk a little bit about our SAIDI minutes, our reliability minutes. We have, goals in our company for how we want to, where we want our reliability to be. And our overall goal for the whole company, for all of our service territory, is about 120 SAIDI minutes annually. And this single storm had an impact of 201 SAIDI minutes just for Montana. And 100 of those minutes came in the first 3 hours just because it was so large with that 44,000 customers.
Okay, I'm sorry, Sadie minutes, can you explain that?
Sure. System average interruption duration index. So you'll need to help me on that.
These metrics are industry known metrics, so that we can speak in terms of nationally known and understood where you're at from a reliability perspective. There's a number of metrics that were put out by IEEE, and they provide the guidance on how you measure your SAIDI, KD, SAFE. KD relates to a metric around customer and duration. The metric that we were focused on here is SAIDI, that's the duration. There's also one that is frequency. And you can say it a number of ways. If a customer has an outage in Montana, the average outage is about 2 hours or 120 minutes. Those are the again, nationally recognized indices that we measure ourselves against, to be able to understand how are we doing in comparison to everybody else in the industry.
And just a little bit further on those indices, like Jason said, we benchmark with IEEE, which is, industry-wide. This will actually be categorized as a catastrophic event. And how it becomes a catastrophic event, a major event is anything over 6 minutes on a SAIDI, and then catastrophic has to be 7 times that. So it has to be 42 minutes for it to be considered catastrophic. Like I said, this was 200 minutes. So huge event. It's 3 times our worst previous event. And coincidentally, our worst previous event was a windstorm in Missoula in 2015. But just really impactful and of a much, just huge scale. Okay. So I'm gonna show an animation here.
Commissioner, while she's showing that, Madam Chair, just to emphasize, I've been with the company over 30 years. This is by far the biggest event, not only by these measures, but just in terms of total cost impact and number of customers that were part of the event from an outage perspective. Dating back much before me, again, to emphasize, this is by far the largest storm event that we've responded to from a customer impact perspective.
Vice President Fielder?
Commissioner Pinochi.
Yeah, a couple of things that I'm wondering about. On the slideshow presentation, it seems like it would make sense to say winds were between 80 and 100 miles an hour. Was that on the slide and I didn't see it?
We didn't put that on the slide. That's what we understand, those that the winds had achieved. Not our data, but certainly point well taken, Commissioner. We should have represented that was the impact in Missoula. I grew up in Western Montana, south end of the Bitterroot, and I remember 8 miles an hour seemed scary. So for that forested region, 90 miles an hour had to be horrific for those that were there.
And were those gusts at peak wind speed gusts, or are you talking about sustained winds?
The whole wind event, as it was reported to me, only lasted about 20 or 25 minutes, and then it was followed up by the rain. So you could almost characterize the whole event as a gust, is the way it was reported to me.
Another question I have is, it seems like most of the time you hear about an extreme event, they say it's a 100-year event, it's a 50-year event. Has anyone said something to that effect? It's a 100-year event. What are your thoughts there?
I really don't have an answer for that. I haven't done the research to determine that, Commissioner. I'm sorry.
Well, I was thinking that, the weather station or some weather guys would give that information to you. I don't know that that should be the responsibility of Northwestern Energy, but it just seems like somebody out there should make a statement that's into that sort of thing. This is a once in a 100-year event or something to that effect. And if you get that, that'd be good to add to the slide. But I do encourage the wind speeds to be put on the slide, because I was really curious about that until you mentioned it. And 100 mile an hour seems pretty serious. Thank you. That's all I have right now.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. And we will do that research
Madam
to
Chairman?
see if there's something out there.
Yes, we can hear a commissioner. Not sure which one.
This is Commissioner O'Donnell.
Go ahead, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that I hope you touch on, it concerns me, is that there's damage from winds that would be compensated for by the strength of the system. So the maintenance of the system, the strengthening of the system is directly relevant to what damage is on there. Can you touch on that a little bit as to whether or not in certain areas that are perhaps more historically vulnerable to wind are strengthened, or is everything pretty much the same strength of lines and transmission abilities?
I don't know that I have the exact answer for that, but I would qualify the answer to that being that the vast majority of the damage that occurred to Northwestern Energy's system were the results of 100-plus-year-old trees, very large trees, falling over and falling into our lines. That was the majority of our damage, was as a result of debris, flying debris, and falling trees.
And were those urban trees, or are you talking about out in the forest?
For the most part, this damage was in our urban areas, so I would qualify that as urban trees. We did have some in the rural, in some of the lines that we had in the rural, specifically like to microwave towers and those type of towers. Saw damage from adjacent trees. And a lot of flying debris was also a contributor.
Okay, Ms. Bench, you have
Yeah,
another.
could I add another question under that?
Yes, Mr. O'Donnell.
Oh, thank you. So what I'm concerned about, in addition, thank you for that answer. That helps a lot. But a number of years ago, when there was a big ice storm, windstorm that happened that got rid of all of the transmission lines, or a significant portion of them along the High Line in particular. And so the company was very, very quick to get those lines back up and get those working again. And the company did a very good job in cooperation with all the co-ops in the area. That was really exemplary. However, what I'm wondering about is if aging lines that were susceptible to the winds and the ice were replaced by lines that were similar. Is there any period of time? For instance, when that train accident happened over the Yellowstone recently, BNSF took the opportunity, from what I could see, to do deferred maintenance on the line. Since it was shut down, they jumped into other places to do that. What I'm concerned about is whether or not the company is doing very much to strengthen those lines in anticipation of some event like this happening with upgraded materials, or is it just, I don't want to, say the company's using the minimal materials to cast a bad light on the company. I don't mean that at all. But is there any effort given to really taking these opportunities to strengthen or just replace?
Couple answers to that. In terms of long-term maintenance, we've been very active in beginning even with our DSIP program in proactively upgrading our system. We're continuing to work on those programs, so we have an aggressive maintenance program to keep up with the upgrade and the aging assets of our company. The other response that I would give in terms of a reactive situation like this, we don't go in with a like for like replacement, if you will. What is restored is to today's standards, and our standards are developed on what we need to do to meet the strength requirements for our region. So a bit of a long answer to say, yes, we're providing for the requirements of what we're required to today by the NSC code within our standard to meet the expected strength requirements for the conditions that we see in our region.
Very good. Thank you.
Commissioner Bukacek.
Thank you. I would think the strength requirements, no matter what you do, might not stand up against large trees falling on them. No matter what right? 80 to 100 mile an hour winds knocking down large trees. I doubt there's anything that could really be guaranteed to withstand that, no matter what the standards. Would you agree?
That's an excellent observation, because I just don't think we're going to build the power line that's gonna sustain the forces that were applied to it. In Commissioner O'Donnell's questioning was more, or at least the way I took it, was more in a situation where it's infrastructure versus wind. And in those cases, for example, much of our infrastructure was built with a 35-foot Class 7 pole. And what we go into today for for a replacement would be a 40-foot Class 4 or 5. So it's a stronger pole, taller pole, beefier pole. Just an example of what we're replacing, and for all the reasons that I discussed. But thank you for that observation. In this particular situation, again, it wasn't our infrastructure versus wind as it much was our infrastructure versus debris, trees, and everything else.
That was my impression. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to show an animation that's data. It's data taken from our AMI metering system, and it shows the onset of the outage event, and then it shows the restoration as it goes through. And kind of tying back to the first screen Jason talked about, where he talked about our restoration strategy, and we start with, the bigger things first, our transmissions, substations, the high density, and then working our way down or to the smaller outages. This is just for the first 24 hours of the event. And it's pretty colorful. There's different colors for each substation group you'll see. And it's a collection of dots that are kind of an aggregate of, this outage, all the meters associated with with this outage. So I'm going to play it. I might pause a couple times just to make a couple comments as well. So I paused right there. Just as you can see, this event didn't grow. I should have put this up there first as well. It's happening in 15-minute increments. The data changes. So at every change, it's a 15-minute increment, but it wasn't there. And then all of a sudden, the whole town is sort of engulfed in this outage.
And typically, like in contrast to the October 17th, 2017 ice storm in Havre, that outage didn't occur at one time. It kind of grew from the west and moved across our system in an eastward progression, where this one at 8:44, everybody was on. At 8:45, everybody was out. That's what she just described.
All right. Let's start it back up here again. I don't know if you noticed, but there was a couple very large sections that went away, kind of the yellow in the center and some off to the northwest. And that's sort of highlighting our restoration strategy, where we're taking care of the biggest things first to get as many people back in as possible, as quickly as we can. And then as we continue to go, you'll see the outages, the dots. Sometimes they come back in as downstream outages are found. But as we start to clear up those outages, the density of the dots gets lighter and lighter and lighter. And this is the end of the animation, not, 24 hours later. And that first slide showed about 44,000 customers out. At this point, we do still have close to 20,000 customers out of power. It's just the size of those outages are much smaller. There's more of them, but they're smaller in scale.
So for this event, we're already beginning to start that single customer restoration. But because they're so scattered, the density of that shows is just a lot of small dots on the screen.
All right. So just talking a little bit about our company effort and the incident command that we've talked about quite a bit. It is pretty wide company effort. It's sort of all in. Help from, every group's involved, certainly distribution operations, our field employees, both of our control rooms, transmission grid operations, our distribution control center. Our engineering groups as we're working through, what work needs to be done. Network operations was involved in this event. They aren't always, but that would be our telecommunications group. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Vegetation management had a heavy focus on this one. Our warehousing for materials, fleet operations, certainly our customer care, corporate communications, and finance. So just really, really touches a lot of different departments. So this slide shows our incident command. This is the incident command that we used for the Missoula event. And we have senior leadership involved in there. I actually played that role in this, or I was in that role in this event. And then my Missoula division manager was our incident commander with all of his, local supervision reporting up to him. He's incident command, so everyone basically reported to him. Sort of off to the left, you'll see our customer care with our contact center. We have a communications officer, and that person's creating all the communication that we're getting out to our customers, also to our employees. And then our liaison officer, that person really does liaise with the other agencies, was very much in touch with the Red Cross, the city of Missoula, all that group. We always have a safety, and we had multiple safety people come on site and an environmental officer with, facilities falling. We had, transformers go down. We had oil spills that we needed to, take care of quickly as well. But we had multiple safety professionals on site out visiting crews. In sort of the operations column there, we have someone that's directing all the crews that we have come in, multiple people actually, engineering support, both distribution and on our transmission system. And, yes.
Just wondering if you can give us some perspective just to help us understand, in context to the last slide where you showed, how the outages hit so suddenly and then it looked like some areas were restored rather quickly in that slide. I mean, how did that happen so fast and what was the timing like of getting this team, deployed in comparison to, when those outages started showing up?
Sure.
Let's touch on that. Commissioner, can you hold that question? We have a slide that absolutely points directly to that question.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. And just back to the incident command, as I mentioned, both control centers heavily involved because both systems, transmission and distribution, were impacted as well in this event, our network operations with our telecommunications. I'll talk a little bit more, but we lost our broad telecommunications, our SCADA system to tell us, kind of what was going on with our system. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And then also materials. Obviously, we needed a lot of stuff to go back out and replace. And then logistics, we brought in a lot of crew help, both on the line side and the vegetation management. And we needed to feed those people and find them hotel rooms. So a lot in there. The key objectives of our incident command, first and foremost is our public and employee safety. We set, very early on, sort of the length of the shift. We knew before the wind was done blowing that this was going to be a multi-day event. And so we can't just go out and work, straight through. We need to make a shift, send the crews home for rest. They're more productive and it's safer to work in the light of day. So, those kind of things are going into those decisions. There's special hazards to mitigate when they're out there, just the massive lines that are down and how they need to handle those safely versus in a planned work sort of situation. What sort of public safety messaging we want to get out with the hazards that they're going to be out there. At our every incident command meeting, our liaison officer would talk about different customer needs as he was talking with the different agencies. One example was there was a water pumping station. We knew the water plant was in power, but they had a ancillary pumping site that they needed us to get back in. So, bringing that information back. Certainly organizing our recovery, the importance of doing those assessments early. As Jason mentioned, if we'd have had everyone there 10 minutes after the wind stopped blowing, we wouldn't have had any work for them. But our engineers, supervisors got out and, very quickly were able to put together, these are our highest priorities. Let's get work packets. Let's get the materials. And we had packets and, pallets of materials ready and waiting when the crews showed up. We talked about logistics and then just communications. So important. And Jason will talk a little bit more on communications, but just how important it was that we were communicating with the company with our customers, and throughout the company with the other agencies, just because of the scale of it. Our normal communications just weren't enough.
Could I interject right here for a question, please?
Of course, Commissioner O'Donnell, go ahead.
Thank you. In terms of the communications, it was a little bit awkward that commissioners weren't kept apprised of this directly, this situation right here. I followed it on the company's website and from moment to moment, and and got updates on there. But because we get questions directed toward us, it would be really useful if somebody would have complied with, I believe our standing protocol is that the commission be kept informed and up to date.
Well, thank you for that. I'll always concede to communications is a challenging thing. It doesn't feel like it's ever enough. But we were, I will also say that we were communicating with staff through our customer care group, through our operations group, informing them of what we had, what our situation was. I will concede to within communications, we can always strive to do better. But I won't say that we weren't communicating to the commission.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will just take this opportunity to add to that comment from Commissioner O'Donnell, because, you know, I was learning about these things on Facebook from my constituents, and I was caught cold because I didn't have any communication from, you know, official sources. So I'm getting word of mouth from my constituents on Facebook telling me where power's out and where it came back on. And I'm getting better information from Facebook and constituent chatter than I am from the utility. So, you know, a means of improving communication with commissioners. We are elected officials. And so we do have oftentimes a pretty big communication network with the public and can provide, you know, pass on information, provide assurances. And then if we're getting firsthand information, you know, we can help prevent misinformation. So I think there's definitely room for improvement there that we should look at and talk about going forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners, and I certainly understand your perspective on that. Thank you.
Commissioner Bukacek.
Yeah, I did read through all of the consumer complaints that came to the PSC, and there was communication with PSC staff from day one, July 24th. So that was in place. So maybe somehow that can just be increased or something. Maybe we can even do something within our agency to get that information to the commissioners, because it is embarrassing when we don't know what's happened.
I absolutely understand. I find myself in the similar situation. So
Yeah.
thank you.
And what happened with this one, which was different and unusual, was that, you know, Northwestern had sent out the alerts about the possible public safety power shutoff. And so we were watching that really close. I know our executive director and our staff and we commissioners were watching that and monitoring. And then when Northwestern Energy de-escalated all of it, I think was it Wednesday afternoon, right before the wind hit, you know, a few hours before the wind hit, I actually drew a sigh of relief and went, oh, good, you know, they've de-escalated, you know, and I expected that there wasn't going to be a problem. And then there was, and it was a really big surprise. So, I mean, things happen. We can't control Mother Nature. And, you know, there are going to be things that arise, but yeah, there's definitely some things. And I know you touched on it earlier that there were some things learned and lessons learned hopefully can be applied and we can smooth some things out going forward.
Yes, thank you for that. And I'll just interject. If we do shut the power off for a PSPS, it won't be in this fashion. It'll be in a much more controlled situation. So yeah, thank you.
Well, it was just the fact that, you know, obviously Northwestern was seeing something big coming. And
yes.
so that was my cue that, oh, something big is coming. And then when Northwestern de-escalated, I thought, okay, we're out of the woods on this, and we weren't. So, but that I think is I'm probably not much different than a lot of the public that might have assumed that, okay, you know, the threat's over, and then it wasn't. And so some way to better communicate to the public about those things too. And I mean, there's lots of things that we can do, but because of that public safety power shutoff system that you've developed with, you know, the different tier levels, which is very helpful, but that's not telling the whole story. obviously, and I assumed that it was at that point. So
Yeah.
I got caught off guard, and I think a lot of folks may have also.
Yeah, the close proximity to when we announced that we were canceling our consideration for a PSPS happening that afternoon, and then this event occurring about 6 hours later. I know there was overlap in why this was happening. So I know the two issues, or the two separate topics, got mixed. So thank you for that.
All right, so just moving on a little bit here, this is the overall, shows the overall timeline of our event. And you can see where we start on the left with the windstorm happening at 8:45 on that Wednesday. The top line, you can see as the customers starting out at that 44,000, how those numbers decrease down. Obviously, more than in half within 24 hours, and then, continue to make our way down through that. Also of note in the green and the orange, how we were mobilizing our crews in, within, I'd say 12 to 14 hours, crews were arriving, both vegetation and line crews to assist. And I don't know if anyone
May
had-
I interrupt with another question here?
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner.
The crews, are they all northwestern crews, or are any from any co-ops or any other linemen working in that area?
No other, none from any co-ops. They are in the orange down there. You can see it'll say internal versus contract, but those were all of our alliance contractors. Not any from.
Oh, I see.
co-ops. Yeah, and then our vegetation crews are also contract crews.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right.
What,
Oh.
can you speak to the shooting incident that you have listed there? That's coming later.
We will speak specifically to that.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Bukacek?
About this slide. Some of the consumer complaints had to do with not getting enough information about estimated restorative times, ERTs. And I read, Angela Rands was the consumer care advocate, and she gave a lot of information to our staff. Excellent, which I'm hoping all that information was on the website. And it talked about the 5 to 40 crews when there are so many power lines that are being impacted at the same time. I mean, that's a lot of the problem. So 35 to 40 crews repairing damage, another 21 crews working on vegetative management. And I do have a question. If a utility company could afford to have, let's say, 200 to 300 crew members sitting around idly waiting for a storm, certainly that everything could be taken care of a lot more quickly, but the added expense of more crews would considerably increase the cost of doing business, obviously, right? So it would be correct that increasing the crews, which would get more people out there quicker to help, would ultimately lead to higher power bills.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I would also just add one caveat to that. We hadn't exhausted our crew resources. We sent what we could effectively manage within the conditions that were there. You can only get so many workers on one street and so many trucks and equipment on one street. So had needed more resource, we still had bench. Our bench was just residing in other divisions, doing the other work of the company until they were called upon. I'm thinking we need to really pick up the pace of this presentation because your questions will be covered through the slide deck, and we'll get to all the specifics of that if
Okay, let's roll.
you could be patient.
Thank you.
This slide just shows the restoration of our customers. As you can see, we had this spike up to 44,000 customers out. There are two lines, one is blue and one is orange. And the blue is from our ADMS system, our Advanced Data Management System. The orange is from our AMI, our Advanced Metering Infrastructure System. And there's a little difference between the two, especially early on. One, our ADMS was was overestimating how many customers they were restoring. And then after a couple of days, they started underestimating how quickly they were restoring. And part of that is, and what that comes from is there's some manual processes on the ADMS where the field is needing to report back in, that they've closed the switch. And then, there's some work with our distribution control center to bring the system up into that same status. So the blue line is a little more manual. The orange out of our AMI system is more accurate. It's not 100% because not every customer has an AMI meter, but the majority do. So, but I would say the orange is more accurate. And I just think, real significant, had half of them back in within a day. And then as we work our way down, it slows down how quickly we're able to restore. So we start working on more and more smaller outages.
I would just add to this slide, I told you we would call out when we got to that single customer restoration. And you can kind of see it on this graph. It's when you really begin to flatten out around that 5,000 customer mark. And it truly takes as much effort for that last 5,000, probably more than with the first 40,000 in order to achieve restoration.
All right, we had a few unique situations to work through during this storm. The first one happened basically within the first hour of the event. We had an impact to our SCADA systems. So the SCADA systems tell us what's going on in the system. It tells us which transmission lines are still in service, which feeders are in service. And just with the extreme winds, we had damage on both our fiber system and our antenna system. And so the first, 2.5 hours, we didn't have the visual in our control rooms. The tan slide shows what our transmission grid operation sees. The yellow, that's all our Russell Street substation in Missoula, with transmission lines going to Missoula number 3 and Miller Creek number 4. And then the black boxes with the arrows are the distribution feeders that go out down the street. So typically we would know right away that something was open. We didn't have that. We had to drive to every substation to determine the extent of what had happened. And then that smaller picture, that's what our distribution control center sees. I don't know if you can tell from the picture, but the yellows are actually little telephones. So at some point we had 44 little telephones out there indicating customer outages, and it got a little busy to see what was going on actually with our system behind it. So they were able to turn that off, but that impacted us quite significantly at the beginning. There was another outage again in the morning, but at that point we had our hands around our assessment. Another situation we worked through was our AMI connectivity. Our AMI system is new. I think we finished our implementation in Missoula around 2022. So it's the first time we've really worked through a very large scale event with the AMI system. Super powerful, just the information it's able to give back to us so that we can determine outages and priorities and be able to restore things. But just the severity, we have what are called CGRs. They're the collectors that collect all the data from the different meters, and then they send that data back to our control rooms. And that mesh was disrupted because everything was out of power, including our CGRs. They have about 8 hours of backup battery, and their batteries, drained down, and they were exhausted after about eight hours. So they don't lose the data. They just aren't able to transmit the data. So once we recognized that it happened Friday evening, we, concerted effort on Saturday and Sunday to get the CGRs back in power. And then we were kind of back in business to be able to prioritize and know for sure who was in and who was out. And then the third situation we dealt with, and this was very, very unfortunate, just a scary, scary situation, was that shooting. It happened the first night of the event. I think we mentioned that we had gas crews out. You wouldn't normally think you're going to have a gas situation going on during a big wind event, but the trees, as you can see in this picture, the trees uprooted parts of our gas system. This happens to be close to a customer's house, but it uprooted and we had blowing gas in several situations. So we had a gas crew out working on one of these blowing gas damages, and it was about 2 a.m. A vehicle drove through, very high speeds, drove through the scene, crashed into a tree. Our crew didn't feel comfortable, and we're trying to get out of there. And then the driver turned around and fired shots at them. And thankfully, nobody was hurt. A bullet did hit one of our vehicles, but thankfully no one was hurt. Our crew was able to, get video of that driver, and then law enforcement from that video were able to identify the driver and apprehend him. So just very scary situation and not something we've dealt with.
I would just add this event and certainly other events that we've had interactions within our customer contact centers and in our local centers, walk-in centers. In addition to other activities that we do, we really are, such as even door tagging. The sad part of this incident, it just certainly highlights the understanding that our Montana community or Montana landscape is changing, and we are looking at initiatives on how do we better protect our employees in these situations. I don't know that we have all the answers yet. We do know that there are other utilities that deal with these situations certainly more frequently than we do. But we do have to acknowledge that the paradigm is changing from a security perspective in how we do our work. And it's certainly on my mind, and I know on our leadership's mind, as our workers are trying to do what's right for them, for our communities, and certainly for our customers. And it's just a shame we have to deal with this kind of a risk.
Just ultra quick comment, but the media always portrays utilities as being evil characters, and that contributes, in my opinion. That's contributing to the culture. It's not balanced.
So I'm gonna move into some of the communication things we did that we worked on. Our dilemma is really this question: when will my power be back on? And it's what all of our employees want to be able to provide an answer to our customers. It really is, however, though, in the beginning, a question that's at a level of detail that initially we're not managing. We're managing, as you can tell by our strategy, at more of a macro level. And we don't find ourselves able to really start dialing into micro type of conversations at the customer level until much later within our restoration strategy. But having said that, you have to provide something. They need the customers, the communities need to be informed on what we're doing and what we expect. And we start putting out communications in many forms to try to answer this question, or at least provide information to customers in lieu of providing the detailed answer to this question. Um, in events like these, our normal communication processes, they just can't, they can't operate under the stress that these conditions would put them in. That is via like our outage map, for example. We're better to take that down and take that offline and communicate in other ways, because the outage map would not look much different than the map that you see on this slide. It's just going to be a whole lot of dots with a whole lot of people out of power. And again, we're managing this from a macro level, from a strategic level on how we're going to restore. But that is our opportunity for our communications. I applaud our communications group and customer care group. Commissioner Buttigieg, thank you for your citing of the communications that went to staff, because that's largely the communications that we put out to our customers in various forms. What we're focused on initially with communications, it's not unlike our restoration strategy. The first thing we need to communicate is safety. In this situation, with trees falling over, they were uprooting gas service lines, rupturing gas service lines. That was our first level of concern, was actually gas blowing in this, what otherwise was an electric event. Again, lines down. So safety, that's first and foremost. And then you can see our communications group begin to shift their communications towards, this is our restoration strategy. We have crews coming from here. If you really read into the print of what they're communicating, they're in many words describing what our restoration strategy is. We can't tell you when your power is going to be back on specifically, but this is what we are doing in response to your power being out. Next slide. So could you go back one? There's one thing I really need to point out. I told you early on that we begin to start forecasting. That far right picture on this slide shows customer equipment that was destroyed by the event. And so early on, this is the actual post, and we also had some information on our website around the same thing, informing customers to do their own assessment. If your meter base looks like this, is what we're saying, you should call an electrician, because the last thing we want to do is not say anything. And the day we get there to actually restore their power, have to have the conversation with them. We can't, you need to get an electrician, and you need to repair your equipment before we can connect ours. And so we forecast this is an issue with many events like this, and we try to get in front of that to let customers begin the process of be ready for us when we get there.
I've heard a question or a comment a few times from Northwestern representatives here, I think in this room, about the meter bases being owned by Northwestern Energy. So when you say you need to fix your equipment, I mean, we're in this picture, we're seeing meter bases that are obviously dislodged. So where is that line between what is a customer's equipment and what is Northwestern's equipment?
Our meter is actually installed in customer equipment. The meter base itself is owned by the customer. And on an overhead service, the point of what's theirs and what's ours is actually on what's called the weatherhead. That's that kind of bald device on the top of an overhead service. On underground, it's actually at the lug where our wires connect within the meter base. But the meter base itself is actually owned by the customer. And it does take, a licensed electrician, and specializing that there's actually a code separation there too. The difference between we're governed by the NESC and that equipment is under the NEC, National Electric Code.
And just what platform is that you've got screenshotted here? What social media platform?
That one's Instagram.
Thank you. Commissioner Bukacek.
Can we go past 3 o'clock? There's still a lot here and I have questions.
I think we're going to have to go a little bit past 3 o'clock. So if there's no objections, we'll continue on, try to wrap it up by 3:15 or so.
Yeah, but we should be able to do that easily. I'm just about done with communications. Then we just have a little bit on stats. So,
Thank you.
so the communication channels that we use, we really strive to develop that active communication strategies. We go into this event, and we are seeking to mitigate large call volumes because that's when customers get frustrated. They want information and they have to sit on the phone to get it. So we try to reach customers in all other forms so that they don't feel that they have to do that to get the information that they need. We do leverage our own webpage. I hear our director of communications describe, we want our customers to come to us. We want to own the message. And so we try to meet customers where they're at too. Social media, certainly our contact center. We will take phone calls. We do try to manage the call rate so that customers aren't frustrated. Walk-in offices in Missoula, that walk-in office took a lot of traffic during that week, and we're able to assist a lot of customers. And then, of course, we also leverage the area media through radio, TV, and public service announcements. So again, we want to be the source of information. Our communication, we focus on safety. We want to know from customers if they're feeling that we don't know that they're out of power, we want them to be able to reach out to us. Prior to these events, all year round, we constantly have messaging on our website and other communications on how to prepare themselves for weather events and some things that they should do. We talked about the partnerships that we have with community support. We want to recognize not only the Missoula community. We gave a $5,000 donation to Missoula Parks and Rec. That was actually for the purpose of tree planting, kind of a seed to start over in terms of vegetation within the city. And then also want to recognize the partnership that we have with Red Cross and all they do for the communities that we serve, and a $25,000 donation to them. On this, there's one more thing to call out. You may not recall, but this occurred at the time during the Olympics, and it kind of represents the majority of what we've heard from the Missoula community. This was a little girl who, because the Olympics was going on, she made this gold medal that you see on this, and she came out and hung it around one of the linemen's necks with the note that says, "We made and gave out gold medals this week. We think NWE deserves a medal for all the work you put in this week. We appreciate you." And I'm pretty sure for this gruffy old lineman, might have drew a tear to his eye. So
Yeah, that's touching. And, it's hard to know how much great effort goes into trying to, get the system back up and running as soon as possible. And I know that, I've known a few linemen in my time, and they are tough and determined individuals, and they do take risks, although I know you have safety protocols, but it's a dangerous job. I'm sure I'm not alone in recognizing that and thanking your company for the efforts that you take to, take care of your customers properly and get on top of these things as soon as you can. I do have a couple comments just about the communication with I'll just pass on to you. When we had a similar, not near as big of a magnitude, but it was very sudden outage hit up in Thompson Falls when I was home back on September 25th. High gusts came through and suddenly the town was without power. I was seeing on social media where other outages were occurring in my area. Other people were reporting being without power, and I could tell some customers about, like, from Northern Lights were back up and going, but the Northwestern customers weren't. I did share your outage map, your website with people. You can report your outages here and go here for information. So I did share that out, and I tried to use it myself. So when I went on to the outage page on your website and tried to report our outage, and I did it so, you would be informed of where the outages were, your company would be. But when I went to I put in all the information and then hit submit, and it wouldn't go anywhere. It just wouldn't go. It didn't budge. So then I called to let somebody know, and I was on hold for 11 minutes before somebody picked up. And when your power's out and you don't know when you're going to get recharged again, and it's the end of the day and your battery's already low, it adds a little bit to the angst of not knowing, what's going on and not being able to report. So, are you going to be speaking about improvements to your outage map system and, any effort or progress that you've made with that today?
I'm not today within this slide deck. I'll just describe. First of all, thank you for sharing that experience. I am happy to say much of this work centers around preference center, and we're nearing the very end of the work that we need to do to set up a preference center, which allows us to understand how a customer wants to be contacted. And it will really enhance our ability to contact us without necessarily having to get on a phone. And I'm really not prepared to talk to all those details. It's probably another hour and a half discussion in its own, actually. But I am really excited about the opportunity, because I think I don't think I know this. The work that we're doing for this technology in a preference center is going to bring us to a new level in terms of our ability to communicate with our customers and have a better data two-way dialogue with customers. So I am excited about that, and
Yeah,
that's right around the corner.
Thank you. I think we'd be interested to hear how that's going, because that was, one of the bigger concerns I think that was raised, was when the outage map wasn't telling people what was going on and they couldn't access it. And then when I myself tried to use it, because I had heard about problems from constituents, so I tried to use it and experienced that it was nice that it was available, but it wasn't, even after I called and reported, it wasn't showing up. So the outages weren't being recorded on there. So the information was pretty hit and miss as far as what, the accuracy of it.
I'll take that down as an opportunity to inform the commission on our progress in that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna turn this over to Kane Clonch, our Director of Construction, and to go through just some general stats and a bit of what the effort was from it's all done and where did we land perspective.
Great, thank you. Well, first off, I'll lead with Commissioner Bujacek actually asked how many crews responded to this. And you can see on the slide here, we had a total of 250, what I'll call full-time employees. Did you have a comment? No, sorry. So what it totaled was 36 electric crews. I'm gonna add gas crews because we did have a couple respond that first night with our gas outages, like we said. So a total of 36 internal Northwestern Energy crews, 36 internal and external crews, and 22 vegetation crews. So again, it was about 18 Northwestern crews and 18 contract crews that responded to this outage, totaling about it was about 185 total employees that worked it, from line crews, supervisors, managers, storekeepers, gasmen, journeymen, electricmen. So now when you look at the overall holistic total, we say about 250 employees. Now that includes incident command, people that were not necessarily boots on the ground, communications, customer service reps. Total, that was about 250 overall holistic employees that we responded overall to this outage. Next slide. Thank you. Here's just a real quick breakdown. When I said that we had 18 internal Northwestern Energy crews, about 40 of those employees that were linemen, apprentices, gas journeymen, there was about 40 of those that responded immediately from Missoula and the Hamilton area. We had another all those divisions up there with respect to the counts and the counts for our crews that responded, along with the supervisors that responded from those other various areas. Now, to what Jason alluded to earlier, we did have more people on our bench. If we needed to go to our bench, we could have brought more over. But again, we want to make sure that we work storms efficiently, that we are not tripping over each other. We want to make sure that we analyze and assess the work that is needed and make sure that we have the crews there and respond appropriately. The last thing that we always want to do is from an optics standpoint is have lines of crews sitting idle and not being able to work those crews efficiently. So again, we just wanted to give you a very quick breakdown to show you how many crews responded and from which divisions, along with the supervisors and engineers. I guess a total, one other stat that I wasn't on there, I could just show you. It was an estimate of greater than 21,000 man hours that we saw in the field over the duration of the storm. Finally, everyone here can see the screen and everyone here can see the notes that we have with respect to the overall cost of the storm, whether it be capital and or expense, and the stats, just to give you a few that we've recorded in the capitalized portion of the storm, which is just under $3 million at this point. We had 33 transmission structures go down, 79 distribution poles go down. We had 59 distribution spilled transformers. We had 15,000 feet of primary wire, and we had 10,000 feet of service wire or secondary wire. So those are just some overall stats that we look at from a capitalized perspective within construction. That doesn't take into account the expense aspect of that. Broken cross arms, broken pins, trees and lines, service wire that's down that we don't replace the entire service wire. We have to splice in somebody's service. That, to Jason's point, as he alluded to earlier, when you get down to those last 5,000 outages, and sometimes it's just one service is caught between a downed tree, those are the ones that actually take the longest time to repair versus, a couple spans of wire that we may be able to put up on one of our primary feeders. And then once we're able to put that up and energize it, we might get 500, 600, 700 customers on at one time. So again, that's just a real quick breakdown that you see between the expense and the capital repairs. The main thing that we want to point out here too is that there are ongoing future repairs. There are fixes that we see from the storm that may have been historic, old poles, historic routes of services that then after everybody's put back in power and we have time to reassess, can we maybe serve this a different way? We might have band-aided it, so to speak. We might have got the pole up just to make sure that we could energize the line. Then we have to come back at a later time and make sure that we have to engineer that to current code. It was put into code 20, 30 years ago. That structure or pole has broken. Now we have to go back in and make sure that's per code in today's world per the NESC. So sometimes these costs and these fixes definitely go well beyond the length of the storm, in this case dating back to July. We're still looking at fixes and engineering fixes down the line that we have to fix. So it's not just storm's done, people are back in power and it stops. We have to make sure that we're maintaining this and everything is put back into place per code, and that takes even months at a time. So we're still seeing costs incurred at this date. Finally, from a post-incident review, I know at the distribution level, Nicole and I both report to Jason. We go over storms in depth at supervisor meetings, manager meetings. We cover those with our crews, and we always ask ourselves, what can we do better? How can we do better? And I think every single storm we learn something, from communication to restoration. Communicating how many crews, when do we stand up incident commands, how many engineers do we need? Can we get crew packets together? Those are a lot of just small examples that we try to improve upon above many. One thing I know that we just got done doing that I think is very, very good is internally at Northwestern, we develop leaders, we develop supervisors, career paths for people. And we have a program called Northwestern. We have Northwestern Energy Leadership Montana, and Northwestern Energy Leadership is a part of that. We bring together all organizations of the company and allow them to get together, learn about the company, outside utilities, and how those coincide with Northwestern Energy as a whole. And as a part of that, on an annual basis here in Helena, we have a section that Nicole, Jason, and I took part on. It's 4 hours basically, and we review on that annual basis the Haverstorm that happened back in 2017. We go through that in depth with accountants, with journeyman linemen, with gas, and basically a whole gambit of Northwestern Energy employees, and go through and give them a taste of what is it like, and give them in a classroom certain aspects of a storm that come. Okay, this substation went out. They work through that. Okay, well now 15 minutes now another substation goes down. I actually allow them to try to work through the storm and see what it's like to be a supervisor and learn from that. I think I had a couple of comments from the latest one here in Helen in August said that was probably their favorite part of the week that they had at Leadership Montana and Leadership Northwestern. So again, that's just another holistic approach to how we try to make sure that everybody, not just in our world and distribution operations, can understand what it's like to be a part of incident command and be a part of responding to a storm.
Well, thank you, commissioners, and thank you for the patience to go a few minutes over. Yes, any remaining questions?
Yeah, I think there's probably a number of questions. So if they can be done, in writing after for some, I would save them for that. If they need to be a conversational question for clarification today, that's fine. Just because we're low on time.
Appreciate the opportunity because it has to do with consumer complaint. So I think it would be good to talk about it because some of the consumers, Angela, again, was just great communicating with our staff, and then to the people that were in trouble. And those breaker-related outages, the way that Angela described it, it sounded like it was related to the enhanced power line safety settings. Because she described it, she said, in the area, they're set to a more sensitive setting due to wildfire risk. So to me, that sounded like EPSS.
Yeah, it certainly is. If we have those in enhanced power line safety saying it's for the purpose of wildfire. During this period, we did have that going on in addition. Remember, we were considering PSPS, and for us, PSPS is a last resort beyond EPSS. So I'm certain that in the Missoula area and during that time of year, we did have certain breaker reclosures that were set to a more sensitive setting.
And one thing that I think would be really useful for customers is to understand that, you didn't have to use PSPS and the EPSS, it sounded like, was maybe limited how that came into, but I think for the long haul, it'll be really useful for the customers to understand that using these things is a trade-off between reliability and safety. And it's all in your information here, but if that could be, kind of simplified to let them know it's a trade-off reliability versus safety. And so the downside of those safety mechanisms is more outages. It's inevitable. So I think if that was explained to people, I think it would be easier for them to understand. And there's an article in Bloomberg just yesterday, if y'all haven't seen it, Utilities Extreme Plan to Stop Wildfires Shut Off the Power. And it was just yesterday in Bloomberg, so I think it's really good timing. And it talks about Xcel Energy in Colorado, Pacific Core in Oregon, Hawaii Electric, PG&E, you know, all those terrible fires that they had and how they're getting sued and how the companies have to be extra careful, not just for safety, but for covering themselves. And so really, really good article if you haven't seen it already.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was your first question went to thought I had when I saw your animation. You know, that so much of it got restored so quickly. Was that because of the breaker sensitivity being restored, or?
No, the breaker sensitivity wouldn't play a part in restoration. How to explain this? All customers in some way are connected to the transmission. So when you lose your transmission, you lose a lot of customers. So that initial restoration, because we focus on restoration on transmission first, that's what enables us to bring large customer groups back, is because they're not going to get restored. Their power is not going to be restored until that transmission is restored. That is the starting place. And in many times, there are no issues between them and the transmission. So when we energize the transmission, they become energized and their power goes back on.
Thank you. Other commissioners that haven't had a chance to ask questions and have been holding questions, do you have anything that we need to cover during this meeting before we adjourn?
Can you hear me there, Vice President?
Yes, Commissioner Pinochi.
All right, so we've got to talk a little bit about high performance conductors and the carbon core, which is twice the strength of steel core. Was in Florida a couple months ago, and they talked about replacing the poles that are wood with concrete and steel, moving to carbon core conductors and power lines, which have more than twice the strength. This meets safety and reliability. We hope it'll cut fires down by more than half caused by power lines, just because we'll cut the amount of power line failure down because of twice the strength. I noticed Northwest Energy has been doing a lot of ads on the radio tackling fire mitigation. I think one of the best ways we can do that is completely get away from steel core conductors. What are your thoughts on that? And are we making the move towards carbon core technology within the power line? Several companies have this available. What are your thoughts there?
Our wildfire mitigation plan is not to go into a lot of detail with that, but it really has 5 elements to it. A couple of the elements that we're most immediately focused on are around situational awareness and how that adjusts our operational practices. In other words, you see the situation, it tells you that you should operate your system differently. Our primary focus around that is that reduces the risk the quickest. From a long-term perspective, we certainly need to look at grid hardening. We've been in the grid hardening space, dealing with infrastructure, aging infrastructure. We're certainly rebuilding assets regularly, and I would say that within our asset management group, that the point you bring up with conductors and conductor type and also pole type, we're doing similar things with our transmission system where we are building using steel constructed poles with many of our new builds. Not necessarily in a replacement perspective, but certainly in a new line, new refurbishment. That's probably the place where that consideration would come into play. And I can't speak on much more than that in terms of what decisions we've made specific to the type of conductor that that you discussed, Commissioner?
Well, I'll say that in Florida, they've made tremendous improvements. Meeting took place at a power company, and they were able to show a 30% improvement in getting customers back online to similar storms in the past. And of course, right now, Florida is faced with another major hurricane. Whether you believe it or not, on extreme weather getting more extreme around the world, it seems to make sense to design a grid to withstand major events to begin with. And this makes us safe, reliable, and I believe affordable, especially when you take a look at conductors cutting line loss by a third. They pay for themselves pretty quickly while increasing safety tremendously. I really don't see the need to be using any conductor with a steel core. Everything should be carbon core because there's just too many advantages. It'd be like trying to talk your daughter or son into getting a car without airbags or anti-lock brakes. It just doesn't make sense. You'd want that new technology that is safe, reliable, and in the long run, affordable. If we prevent a fire, we pay for a lot of new power line. But when the power line cuts line loss by a third and increases safety, we really, I think, make the more expensive decision when we choose to use outdated conductors. So anyway, wanted to point that out. Really appreciate your meeting today. And it was impressive putting together a command center and approaching the problem. But I would like to see less wood poles used and more steel structure and concrete. And they're certainly making those decisions in Florida, and they've got tremendous results of improvement that they were able to show. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll bring that information back. I appreciate you sharing.
Thank you. Any other questions from other commissioners?
Well, this is President Brown. I would just echo what Commissioner Pinocci stated. I appreciate the time shown by Northwest Energy today to come brief the commission, and is informative and be beneficial to the public. So thank you.
Thank you, President Brown. With that, I guess I don't need to say it. So thank you all for coming. We really do appreciate it. And we've got a electronic copy of your slides, I presume. Thank you for the hard
Yes, you do.
copy. And if any commissioners or staff would like to follow up in writing with any other questions or comments, feel free to do so. And with that, we will go ahead and adjourn this informational meeting. The time is 3:23. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioners.